Hi, and welcome to the Nightmare Vault. Today, we have three reverse horror stories, stories from the perspective of the monster. Please consider commenting, liking, and subscribing. It really helps me out. Okay, let's get on with the stories. I've always relished the quiet moments before the end. Each breath, each heartbeat magnified as I close in on them. It's in those moments that I feel most alive, most powerful. For years, I've perfected my craft, turned it into something almost beautiful in its precision. The thrill of the hunt, the control, it's intoxicating. I've spent countless hours refining every detail, ensuring that no one ever suspects a thing. They never see me coming, never even realize they're being watched. She was just another target, another piece in my game. I watched her for weeks, learned her routines, her habits, the way she smiled at strangers, the way she hurried through the park at dusk. I knew when she would be most vulnerable, and I waited for the perfect moment. When it came, it was swift, clean, just like always. But as I stood over her, I couldn't help but marvel at my own handiwork. The precision, the artistry. It was perfect. The way she collapsed so effortlessly, like a marionette with its strings cut. Her eyes, once so full of life, now frozen in that final moment of realization. I hovered over her for a few seconds longer than usual, just to savor it. The silence around us was thick, almost sacred. The world had no idea what had just happened, and I loved that. As I melted back into the night, I could still feel the thrill coursing through me. I walked the same route I'd carefully mapped out in my mind 100 times before, each step perfectly timed, each movement deliberate. By the time I reached my car, any trace of her was long behind me, swallowed by the darkness. I didn't even look back. I never do. I don't have to. I returned to my life, blending back into the crowd with ease. No one ever suspects someone like me. I'm the face you pass on the street, the man you nod to in the lift, the neighbor who keeps to himself. I've honed this facade over the years, perfected the art of disappearing in plain sight. It's all part of the game, the thrill of knowing that I can move through the world unnoticed, untouchable. But it's not just about the kill. It's about the anticipation, the careful planning, the way every detail falls into place. It's a puzzle, and I'm the only one who can see the whole picture. Each piece is another victim, another life snuffed out, another perfect moment captured in time. And when it's over, I can sit back and admire my work, knowing that I've done it again, that I've outsmarted them all. There's something exhilarating about knowing that I hold life and death in my hands. I can end it all with a single decision, a single moment of action. And they never see it coming. They go about their lives, blissfully unaware that they're living on borrowed time. It's that ignorance, that vulnerability that I find so fascinating. They're so fragile, so easily broken. I've often wondered if anyone will ever figure it out, if anyone will ever connect the dots. But I've covered my tracks too well. Each kill is a masterpiece, a work of art that leaves no trace, no evidence. I'm meticulous, obsessive even about the details. I know how to blend in, how to disappear when I need to. It's all part of the game, the challenge of staying one step ahead. Sometimes I allow myself to toy with the idea of leaving a clue just to see if anyone is clever enough to follow it, just to see if anyone is on my level. But I never do. The risk, the possibility of being discovered, it's too much of a thrill in itself. I don't need to tip the scales in their favor. The real pleasure is in knowing that I'm always one step ahead, that no one even realizes there's a game being played at all. But the real thrill comes afterwards, when I can replay the events in my mind, savoring each moment. When I remember the look in her eyes as she realized what was happening, the way her breath caught, the way she tried to scream but couldn't. It's in those moments that I feel truly alive, that I feel the rush of power that comes from knowing that I've taken something that can never be replaced. It's not just the memory of the act itself. It's the way I can re-experience every sensation, every detail, as if I'm right back there in that moment. The sound of the night closing in around us, the cool air on my skin, the way her pulse quickened under my grip. Every memory a treasure to be revisited whenever I want. It's like I can freeze time, hold on to that perfect instant forever. They'll never know who I am, never even suspect. I've perfected the art of hiding in plain sight, of becoming whoever I need to be to get close. I can be charming, friendly, disarming. I can be the person they least expect, the one they trust implicitly. And that's the real beauty of it all. They never see it coming. I've been doing this for years, and I've never been caught. I'm too careful, too smart. I know how to cover my tracks, how to stay ahead of anyone who might come looking. And even if they did, what would they find? A life so meticulously curated that it leaves no room for doubt, no hint of what lies beneath the surface. But I've learned that it's not enough to just kill. There has to be something more. Something that keeps me going, that keeps me coming back for more. It's the game, the challenge, the thrill of knowing that I'm in control, that I can take a life and leave no trace. It's about the power, the dominance, the feeling that I'm untouchable. As I lie awake at night, I think about the next one. I already know who it will be. I've seen her, watched her, studied her. She has no idea, of course. She goes about her life, oblivious to the fact that she's already been chosen, that her fate is sealed. The thought of it sends a shiver of excitement through me. Soon I'll begin the process again, the careful observation, the planning, the anticipation, and then, when the time is right, I'll strike. It will be perfect, just like all the others. I know that one day, this will all come to an end. It has to. But until then, I'll keep playing the game, keep perfecting my craft, keep pushing myself to be better, to be smarter, to stay ahead of the curve. Because in the end, it's not about the kill. It's about the thrill of the hunt, the satisfaction of knowing that I've done it again, that I've outsmarted them all. And when it's over, when I've taken my final breath, I'll know that I've won. I'll have lived a life on my terms, a life of power, of control. A life where I was always one step ahead, always in command. And they'll never know, they'll never suspect, because by the time they realize what's been happening, I'll be long gone, leaving nothing behind but the perfect silence of a world that never knew me at all. It wasn't supposed to be like this. Retirement was meant to be peaceful, a time to forget the things I'd done, the things I had to do. I'd served my country, protected countless lives, and used every method at my disposal to get the job done. That's what I keep telling myself, at least. I wasn't a monster. I was just doing what needed to be done. I moved to a quiet, secluded place, far from the memories, far from anyone who might recognize me. Life here was simple. Coffee in the morning, a walk in the afternoon, and the comfort of knowing that I was finally free from the weight of my past. The isolation was a kind of balm, soothing the raw edges of a life lived in the shadows. But even in the silence, there were whispers, small, nagging doubts that crept in during the night. Did I cross a line? Was it all really necessary? Those questions haunted me in the dark, but I always pushed them away. I had no choice, I told myself. The missions I was tasked with required certain measures that others couldn't stomach. I was the one who could go where others wouldn't, do what others couldn't. And if that meant using methods that left a stain on my soul, then so be it. The greater good demanded it. But that morning, something felt off. It wasn't anything I could put my finger on, just a sense of unease, like a storm gathering on the horizon. I tried to ignore it, busying myself with the routine tasks that kept me grounded. But as the day wore on, the feeling grew, gnawing at me, making the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. The house, once a sanctuary, felt alive with it, every creak and groan amplified until it was unbearable. Then, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the lights went out. I was plunged into darkness. My first thought was a power outage, but the silence that followed was too complete, too final. No hum of electricity, no ticking of the clock, just an oppressive, suffocating silence that pressed in on me from all sides. And then a sound, a soft, rhythmic tapping. It echoed through the house, growing louder. My heart pounded in my chest as I moved towards the door, the sound stopping just as I reached for the handle. I opened the door to find nothing, just the empty, dark hallway. But the unease had settled deep into my bones now, and I knew something was terribly wrong. I hesitated before stepping back into the living room, my senses on high alert. The space seemed smaller, the walls closing in around me. I could feel the weight of every decision I had ever made pressing down on me. Back in the living room, I noticed the newspaper I'd left on the coffee table was gone. In its place was a folded piece of paper with my name on it. My hands trembled as I picked it up and unfolded it, revealing a message scrawled in familiar, jagged handwriting. "Do you remember me?" My blood ran cold. It was my handwriting, from years ago, from another life. I had written those words on a note handed to a man I tried to break in a small, dark room. A man whose name I had forgotten, but whose defiant eyes I could never erase from my mind. I thought I'd buried those memories deep, locked them away where they couldn't hurt me anymore. But now, they were surfacing, clawing their way back into the light. The tapping resumed, louder and faster, reverberating through the walls. Panic surged through me as I ran for the door, but before I could reach it, a voice, low, guttural, and filled with malice, whispered my name. It was coming from the basement. I wanted to run, to get out, but something compelled me to move towards the stairs. I had to know. I had to see what was waiting for me down there. The basement was pitch black, the air cold and damp. I fumbled for the flashlight, its beam slicing through the darkness, revealing the chair in the center of the room. It was the chair, the one I had used so many times, where men's wills were broken, where secrets were spilled, and in that chair sat a figure. My breath caught in my throat. It was him, the man who had never broken. As I stood frozen in place, the door behind me slammed shut, trapping me in the darkness with him. And then the voice came again, closer this time, dripping with the same hatred that had filled those eyes so long ago.
"Do you remember me?"
He lifted his head, and the light flickered, revealing his scarred, twisted face. Before I could react, he was on me, dragging me to the chair, binding me with ropes that I had once tied around his wrists. I struggled, but it was futile, and then the pain began, relentless, excruciating, as he inflicted on me the same horrors I had administered to others. Hours passed, maybe days. Time lost all meaning in the darkness, in the agony that tore through my mind and body. I was broken, reduced to nothing more than a shadow of the man I had been. When it was finally over, I was left alone in that cold, empty room, shattered and defeated. The silence that followed was absolute, the kind that seeps into your bones and stays there. I could still feel the ropes tight around my wrists, even though they were gone. I could still hear his voice, even though he had vanished. And I knew as I crawled out of that basement that there was no escaping this, no running from the things I had done. The past doesn't stay buried. It digs its way out, finds you in the quiet moments, in the dark corners of your mind. It waits until you're at your weakest, until you think you've finally found peace, and then it comes for you. And when it does, it shows no mercy. I was always the invisible one. The man who knew how to disappear in a crowd, who could walk through life unnoticed, unseen. My name is Mark, and I've spent years perfecting the art of vanishing, But there was one person who I never wanted to hide from. Sophie. She was the light in my otherwise dim existence, a colleague who had no idea how deeply she had ensnared me. Sophie was intoxicating. Not in the obvious way, not like the women plastered on magazine covers. She had a subtle beauty, the kind that creeps up on you, takes hold, and refuses to let go. It was in the way she moved, the way she laughed with that slight tilt of her head, the way her eyes would glaze over when she was lost in thought. I watched her, every day, from a distance, always careful, always calculating. I knew her better than she knew herself, her routines, her habits, her secrets. My apartment became a shrine to her. Every photo, every scrap of paper, meticulously organized. Each item had a place, and in each photograph, Sophie smiled back at me, oblivious to the depths of my obsession. I had control. I knew where she was at any given moment, who she spoke to, where she went after work. There was power in that knowledge, a rush of knowing that she was mine in ways she could never understand. But control is a fickle thing. It can slip through your fingers when you least expect it. It started with small things I could have dismissed if I hadn't been so meticulous. A note out of place, a photograph that seemed just slightly off, as though it had been moved and then returned. My heart would pound, but I'd tell myself I was imagining it. Paranoia, that's all. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. Something was very, very wrong. Then the letters started. Simple at first, just a few words scrawled on a piece of paper slipped under my door. The first time I found one, I laughed. It was an attempt at intimidation, but they didn't know who they were dealing with. I was the watcher. I was the one in control. But as the days passed, the notes kept coming. I know what you did. You can't hide. I tried to maintain control, to rationalize it. Maybe it was just a prank, someone at work playing games. But it wasn't long before I noticed other things. My personal belongings, once neatly arranged, now shifted ever so slightly. My routine disrupted in ways that only someone who knew it as well as I did could manage. It was like looking into a mirror and seeing yourself for the first time, realizing that someone else had been looking back at you all along. And then there was that night. I came home late, the streetlights casting long, sinister shadows across the pavement. The unease had been building all day, a tight knot in my chest that wouldn't go away. I reached my flat and the door was ajar. I had been so careful, so meticulous, I knew I'd locked it. My hand shook as I pushed it open, the darkness inside swallowing me whole. There, in the center of my living room, was a single photograph, not of Sophie this time, but of me. Taken from a distance as I stood outside her apartment, unaware, engrossed in my own twisted ritual. My heart stopped, a cold sweat breaking out across my skin. Someone had been watching me. I tore through the flat, searching for any sign of an intruder, but there was nothing. No one. Just the overwhelming stench of fear and the suffocating realization that I was no longer in control. I was the one being hunted. Days passed and the letters grew more direct, more violent. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. I started seeing things, shadows where there shouldn't be any, reflections in the mirror that lingered just a second too long. My once ordered world was crumbling around me, every aspect of my life invaded by this unseen predator. And then, in the darkest recesses of my mind, I realized this was my doing. I had made myself vulnerable. The horror of it was undeniable. The way I had manipulated Sophie, controlled her, had left me exposed, an open wound just waiting to be torn apart. I had never considered the possibility that someone could be watching me, studying me with the same cold, detached interest that I had reserved for her. And yet, here I was, ensnared in a trap of my own making, a fly caught in a web spun by another, more sinister creature. The final straw came on a stormy night, rain lashing against the windows, the wind howling through the cracks in the walls. I was on edge, every noise amplified in the darkness. My hands shook as I poured a drink, the amber liquid sloshing over the rim of the glass. And then I felt it, that prickling sensation on the back of my neck, the unmistakable feeling of being watched. I turned slowly, every nerve in my body screaming, and there it was. My reflection in the window, distorted by the rain, a twisted, warped version of myself. But it wasn't just me. There was something else, something behind me in the shadows, watching, waiting. I spun around, but the room was empty, and yet I could feel it. Something in the air, something that didn't belong. My breathing grew ragged, panic clawing at my chest. I was unraveling, coming apart at the seams. I reached for the wall, steadying myself, trying to regain some semblance of control. But it was gone, shattered, just like everything else in my life. I had become a prisoner of my own fear, trapped in a nightmare I couldn't escape. Days turned into weeks, each one darker than the last. The letters stopped coming, but the feeling remained. That gnawing, inescapable dread. I stopped watching Sophie. I couldn't bear it anymore. The sight of her, so innocent, so unaware of the monster I had become, was too much. I was no longer the man who watched from the shadows. I was the man being hunted, haunted by an enemy I couldn't see, couldn't fight. In the end, it wasn't the letters or the photographs that broke me. It was the realization that I had done this to myself. My own obsession had made me vulnerable, exposed me to a darkness I could never have anticipated. The fear, the anxiety, the helplessness, I'd inflicted them on Sophie, and now they were my only companions. I was living the horror I had created, trapped in a cage of my own design. Now, I exist in a state of constant fear, every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the wind, a reminder that I am not alone. I've become a ghost, haunted by the specter of my own actions, unable to escape the shadow that looms over me. I can't go on like this, but there's no way out. The hunter has become the hunted, and there is no escape from the darkness I've let in.